Archives Live. I'm Krishayla Smith, and I'm here with Head of Archives, David Peters, and Sarah Milligan, who is Head of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program here at the library. How are you all doing today?
Doing great.
Good. Ready to talk about some research?
Sure.
Okay, so last week here at the library, we celebrated Research Week. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of research here at OSU and how it's still happening today. Don't forget to send in your questions so we can get to them throughout this live. So, our first question, Sarah, you're new to us today. You're our guest, and you're in OOHRP. Mm-hmm. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what OOHRP is?
Yeah, so the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary in 2017, and so we're fairly new as far as things on campus go. But we essentially document the history and culture of Oklahoma through first-person perspectives. So we go out and we record, sort of individuals' accounts of industry or community or historical events throughout the state, and we do that in audio and primarily also video format. And then we come back and we create all that material together, transcribe it, and make it available for researchers and the general public online.
Very cool. So now that we know that there is research still happening on campus, David, can you tell us what kicked off research here?
Well, most people are familiar with the Morrill Act, which helped create the land-grant college system. But the Hatch Act provided research funding for colleges that in the land-grant system to develop agricultural experiment stations. And so the initial research at OSU, at the time OAMC, Oklahoma Agricultural Mechanical College, involved agricultural research taking place at the experiment station. So that started in 1891, and they've had research going on in ag, and then now, of course, other colleges since that time. But it was the Hatch Act of 1887 that provided the funding for that.
Interesting. So both of you are in departments that have a lot to do with research, and people can come view the research. What is some ways people come and use these departments?
So we have a number of resources, and most of the people using our stuff are interested in historical material. And so we have the resources that they take advantage of. We have the President's Papers from OSU. We have a number of collections related to Oklahoma State University and its mission, including natural resources, our women's archive. And so we just collect the resources for researchers to use. What happens is we make inventories of those collections, and as those inventories are made more available to a larger population, now we get requests from not only Oklahoma, but across the nation.
Yeah, and we, since we're such a sort of new-ish department as far as creating research and providing access to it goes, because gosh, the archives have been around for
a long time.
We're fortunate enough that everything that we have created as a research department has been created in a digital format. And so it makes it easier for us to provide immediate access and remote access to the material that we do document. And so because we were created as a research arm of the library to create primary source documents, everything that has been processed and is ready to be made available to the public, unless there is a restriction for some reason that could be time or content, that material goes online through our digital collections site. And so people can get at it unfiltered and easily search through it.
And see, we have the official documents here, but what Oral Histories provides is those other layers of information from people who maybe weren't included in the official documents. And so it really provides an opportunity to expand our understanding of the story, no matter what that story is.
That's true. That's another thing too, that to expand on from that is, we this is the number one question we probably get: how do you decide what you're gonna record? But so we look and see what is already available through archives and through other ways to do that first person primary source research set. So we look and see what's available through newspapers and what people have donated to archives, and we try and figure out what's missing from that. Like, what perspectives can we still get at that aren't already loaded other places, and we use that as a way to, you're right, sort of fill in some of the holes for what's out there.
Both of you mentioned like primary research. What's important about getting primary research from these two departments?
For us, the primary resource is really kind of the first telling of the story. These are the individuals who touched the item, who worked with the item, whatever it is. That's the first layer of the story, and really, in some ways, it creates the foundation for the telling of that story. But it's only the foundation. You've got to build a structure around that. But our primary resources are, for many people, provide that initial structure.
Yeah, and for us, I mean, at the core of what we do is very humanistic, right? Like we're working to help people be able to recount their perceptions of something that they've lived through. And so it's outside of someone taking the time to write a diary or to document letters and save it and sort of, be able to deposit all this. That's not really how people interact with each other anymore as often. And so it's a way to really get at someone's actual experience. And sometimes that's the way that they remember that experience can tell us things. Sometimes the way that they explain it can tell us things. And sometimes just hearing somebody be able to provide details that aren't rich other places helps us really understand what it was like to live through a certain period or be part of that specific community, or sort of understand the give and take between how decisions were made that have really affected culture, and the way that we've shifted throughout time in Oklahoma as well. Because, I mean, we're not that old of a state, so it's not unreasonable for us to even talk to people, not necessarily anymore that we're here pre-statehood, but, we can get pretty close sometimes. We just finished a project in the last couple of years where our department worked with Dr. Alex Bishop in Health and Human Services, who's a gerontologist, to interview 111 centenarians around the state. And so that's 100 years backwards, sometimes 105 years. There was some backwards, and you're looking at that, and you really can get the long view of what one person's perspective is for a time living through almost the entire history of the state. And so that's pretty unique to us, and pretty important, I think, to be able to provide a space for people who are willing to share that experience with the public at large.
For example, we'll have like a photograph. We'll have the original first photograph of something, but sometimes we don't understand the context for that. We may have a certain understanding of what we think it is, but if you visit with someone who maybe was there or experienced that, then now you add that layer of their providing that contextualization for that image that makes both experiences now more worthwhile and rewarding. So it's a kind of a blending, I hope, of resources.
It is. We do try and work together wherever we possibly can. For our time frames, match up on what we can still get people's perspectives on.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. So we have some questions from our viewers. But if you're just now joining us, I'm here with Head of Archives David Peters and Head of OHRP Sarah Milligan, and we're talking about research. Let's take a look at some of the questions we have from our Facebook viewers, and you can still send in your questions. Okay, so we have a question from Tatum Wallace, and her question says, what do you think is the most interesting research project that has been performed in the past?
I'll take this one, and it's interesting that you brought that up. We started a wheat trial in 1891, and so that research project has been ongoing now for 27 years. It was called the Magruder Plots. It was located originally where Murray Hall is now, but then later moved out to where the Agricultural Pyramid Station is. But I find it to be, for just a longevity, to think that there have been a series of researchers all involved with this same project over that length of time. It's still I think it's the longest continuing research project of an agricultural nature west of the Mississippi River. So it's an amazing research program, and I know that people in agriculture are very proud of it. So, and I brought up a picture in case people, when it was still located on the main campus.
Sarah, do you have a favorite project you worked on?
Oh gosh, favorite and most are really dangerous words, right? So I'm going to go with maybe one that tends to surprise people the most. We have a collection of interviews that we conducted a handful of years ago with a community in Hugo, Oklahoma that winters there. They're family circus communities, right, that spend their winters in Hugo, Oklahoma. And if you've ever driven through Hugo, you would know that because it's very obvious that there's a circus influence there. And so the department gotten a grant from the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress to do occupational folklife of the circus community in Hugo, Oklahoma. And it is a really, really interesting collection. And that's all available online. There's images that they scanned while they were there with these families, as long as to go along with the recordings and the interviews and the transcripts. So,
cool. Okay, we have another question from Michelle Dickey, and her question is, how do you make sure that the archives are searchable for researchers?
For us, what we try to do is, during our processing of a collection, create inventories and indexes for that material, so that there's no way that people can have access to all of it at the same time. But if they have access to an inventory or an index of that, then they can figure out what they need. And some of our collections are fairly large, and so rather than having to pull 20 boxes off, you can just pull off 1 or 2 boxes because they've been able to specify which folders they're interested in. I'm telling you way too much detail here, but we try to create these inventories for people and then make them available online. And so our efforts right now are to move many of our collection inventories into the main catalog, which eventually will get into larger catalogs that then people anywhere can search on certain terms, and they'll discover that we have things here at Oklahoma State University.
Yeah, and that's a really good question, Michelle. And like David said, it's not super simple, but the easy way for people to find content is to kind of understand how that material is processed. And so why it takes sometimes a year or two for us from the time we do an interview, from the time it might be available online or through the public, is because we do everything from we transcribe verbatim what's said during the interview, so then you have a keyword searchable document that you can go back and help reference the original recording. But we also create metadata, which if you do anything in these days, anywhere with Google or with any way that you search for anything, you work with metadata. Every time you take a picture, it creates metadata, right? Like all the information that helps you understand what the thing is you're creating. And so by the way that we describe and the way that we tag each interview helps people be able to get at what's really prevalent in that interview and why they might be interested to be able to research it. And all of that goes into our digital collections sort of database. That's the word I'm looking for. And so you can go through and you can search and see what you're looking for, and you should be able to keyword pull up whatever it is that you're interested in searching. But it takes a lot of work on the back end to be able to get to the point where we can anticipate as much as we can what someone would possibly ever want to use that research for, right? So just really in-depth descriptions.
And you mentioned all the hard work that it takes to get the content available. So we know that since you have so much research going on, that it takes a lot of work for your departments, to come up with this and the research that has to be done before others can research that content. Can you tell us a little bit about how OHRP goes about doing interviews or just simply gathering information?
Yeah, so the process is, I think most people, when we first talking about the fact that we do oral history interviews, it seems really simplistic, right? Like we find somebody to talk to, we schedule an interview, we sit down with them, and then we are done, right? But really that is like the cleanest, tiniest slice of what it is in the whole process, from oral history conception to public access. And so, a lot of actually what it takes with oral history is community building and a lot of upfront research and outreach to people to try and build trust and build an understanding of what an oral history project might look like and why someone would want to participate. So, there's obviously a lot of like, why would you want to do this? And, what the process is going to look like. And then once you get to actually scheduling the interviews, often that requires a lot of travel. We travel all over the state. We did this statewide project where for the 125th anniversary of OSU, where we interviewed at least one OSU alum in all 77 counties in Oklahoma. And for that project, we traveled about over 21,000 miles over the course of 2 years just for that project. And so we spend a lot of time in the car. And so that's part of it. Then we bring it back and we have students that we work with that do the first level of transcription. And then we have another set of eyes, listen to the interview and read through the transcript. And then that interview goes back to the interviewee so they can make sure that all the dates and pronouns and everything, everybody's name is spelled right, and just have a last chance to look at it before it comes back to the office, and then we can provide access to it publicly. So, every interview you do might take 2.5 to 3, 1.5 hours, something like that, to conduct the interview, and about every hour of interview takes 7 to 10 hours to transcribe. And then, 3 or 4 hours to audit, depending on how fast you are and how good the transcript is. And then it has to get mailed out, and then you wait time. So, it's just like this, the process just kind of stretches out. And if there are 4 or 5 of us in the department who are doing interviews, then that, you might bring in 10 interviews a month, which all require the same thing. And so it just takes time. And then we have to work through the metadata and the description and all of that on top of just that. So it's a lot of steps.
Thank you for putting in all of that. We have some more questions from our viewers. So let's take a look at one of our questions we have. From Anthony Jones, he says, is the research done by the archives in OHRP used by groups outside of OSU?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Like I don't have stats off the top of my head just because I didn't pull those before I came, but people get to our interviews from all over the world. You can if you're researching a specific topic that is tagged in our metadata and even our transcripts, Google will pick it up, and so people find all sorts of material. And, we're topic specific often. So, for example, we have a series of interviews on the Korean War with Korean War vets. And it's not even a really big series of interviews, but we have a tremendous amount of hits on that for people who are just trying to come to that as a part of military research in U.S., military war research. And so it's amazing how people get to our material, but yeah, it's definitely not just OSU. And we do a large set of what we have conducted interviews wise might cover OSU. We have an ongoing alumni running project that deals with everything from people living in a certain dorm or understanding a certain building or from a certain program or just, sort of campus in general. But that's probably, I don't know, maybe 1/4 of what we do overall. We cover the states in general. So yeah.
Well,
yes.
And they're lucky, but you're all digital. Your content is.
We're not backing up 40 years to try and catch up. Yeah.
And so less than probably 5% of the material in the archive is available in a digital format, and it's rare that I think we'll probably even get to 10% ever of our materials, because most of it just doesn't have that much of a demand. But for those materials that we do see a demand, we're trying to move into digital realms so that people have access to it outside of OSU and outside of Stillwater. And as we do that, then that's when we find we get more hits from other places. So moving items to digital, at least in our case, helps spread the word about what's available. But even just our inventories that are available through our collection database software allows us now to expose those collections to people over a much larger geographic area. And so we get questions from all over the United States.
And all of this research can be found on the OkStateLibrary website, correct?
Some of it, much of it.
Majority of it.
I'm not sure if they're interested, but we can at least feature some of our. So we have a series of digital collections that are available, and if people are interested in a variety of different things, we're still working on this, but it's a growing concern. I'll just bring up several different sites. Here's a collection of glass lantern slides from the archive, from soil erosion and conservation on the Southern Plains. And so there's just a variety of different possibilities. Here is this the oral histories? Which one is this? Oh, Secrets of the Century. This was one in 1941. Individuals at the college wrote down little secrets that then were opened up in a time capsule 50 years later. And so we've digitized all of those secrets of the century. We have Angie DeBoe's collection here, and much of that now is available in a digital format. And so if they're interested in researching the things that Angie DeBoe looked at, that's available. We have the Bill and Jean Kelso collected our ancient coins. And so if you're interested in looking at ancient coins, those are available online. Paul Miller was a journalist with the Gannett Corporation and Associated Press. And so if you're interested in his collection, that's all available now through the site. And then I think we have, and then that's the oral history. Is that, did we get the right one? Oh, I'm sorry. That's the Shelaco. Yeah. We did a project with Oral Histories. They got us into this, and we're glad they did. They were doing interviews with alumni from the Shelaco Agricultural School. And so then we began working with the Alumni Association to try to preserve and capture many of the images from the school. And so those images, there's about roughly 1,100 plus images that are available for people to look at.
Cool. So it's all available.
Well, some of it's available.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so we have one more question. And this question comes from William Davis. And his question is, what are some innovative ways in which the archives and OOHRP conduct research?
Conduct research. I really see us as providing the information for researchers. You know, we'll research small little questions. We get questions all the time from the Alumni Association or the Foundation or others on campus looking for information about OSU. And so we'll do research, you know, as a service for them. But really, I see our primary role is providing the research materials for others to harvest, and hopefully they'll utilize things that we've been saving.
Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh, I mean, we're always thinking about creative ways that we can get the material that we've documented out there to new eyes. And so the word that we kind of use often is sort of curating material, right? So we take the research that we've done and we try and figure out a way to package it in a way that gets people into the content without being the only way that you can point into it is through deep diving in an hour and a half long interview, right? Like, we get it. Not everybody's cup of tea is like, oh my gosh, can I sit through somebody else talking for an hour and a half? So often we try and find ways that we can help provide facilitated discovery of some of our content. So for example, we have a YouTube channel where there are, clips from interviews that talk about specific things that might just give people a sample of what sort of information you might find in our collections. We also work, for example, we have an Oklahoma Native Artist Oral History Project, which has been going on since 2010, and we have 120, 130 interviews that have been conducted with that project so far. And one of the interesting things that the project director, Julie Pearson Little Thunder, does with that project is that when there are exhibits that are focusing on Oklahoma Native artists or a lot of the Indian art fairs around the state, she'll work with the curators for those places or the coordinators for those to see if there's ways that we can use our interviews to help highlight artists' work. And so we'll provide clips through QR codes and things that'll go along with a lot of these exhibits or these sort of artist presentations that show the research that we've done for this project, but also help expand what those organizations are trying to do. And so we try and find as many creative ways as we can to highlight our work, but also to put it to work out there where people actually might interact with it in a different way than that's just straight up scholarly research. But the idea is to get them back into the original content as much as possible.
And so, for example, your work with our Facebook, Archives Facebook account. So you've done tremendous things showing people the variety of material we have, in the archives. And we have a history pin account too. And so there people can look spatially at different kinds of information. So like Sarah was saying, you try to provide as many different avenues or pipelines for people to get access to your material and make them aware of it. And we appreciate people assisting us with that.
Great. So before we go, what are some current projects you might be working on that people will maybe soon be able to get to see or view?
I don't know about soon. We just got a fairly significant collection of material from international programs that involved OSU's efforts in Ethiopia. And so we've got a large batch of material to go through there, including a number of photographs and records. related to that meaningful experience for many OSU staffers who traveled to Ethiopia and spent several years of their lives over there and working with the populations of Ethiopia to try to develop a similar land grant system that we have here. So that's one of the most recent ones that we've received.
Which we have interviews about in our O State Stories collection about from folks who participated in that project. Go ahead.
So material's still coming in, and it's nice to be able to then blend it with these first-person accounts that oral history provides.
I should have mentioned a second ago, I'm going to back up, that we've had a podcast for the last 2 years called Amplified Oklahoma, which helps us be able to use material from our oral history archives in conjunction with some creative digital storytelling. And so that's one of the ways that we get our material out there, and helps us also showcase what's sort of interesting that we're doing at the same time. One of the things David actually mentioned, one of the projects that we're sort of coming towards the end of a two-year commitment with is this Chilocco Indian Agricultural School project that we have been conducting interviews with the Alumni Association, primarily with their veterans, is how it started out with. The Chilocco Indian Agricultural School has a huge percentage of U.S. military veterans that have come through there, mainly because they had a National Guard unit that was attached to the campus since the 1920s, and the campus closed in 1980. But that's a long stretch of time that you had sort of students right there and ready for the National Guard paycheck that rolled into lots of other types of military service. And so we started doing interviews with that group because they were looking around and sort of saying somebody needs to do this, and let's figure out a long-term plan, and invited us in to talk about that. And it's rolled into a larger documentation project about the alumni in general from that federal boarding school, at Federal Indian Boarding School. And so, for example, by the time we get done with that project, we'll have the oral history interviews that we've conducted. We'll have the scanned images from the Alumni Association that Archives has been working with them on, a couple of thousand probably by the time it all gets said and done. Yeah. We have hired a media company, Fire Thief Productions, out of Tulsa, to do sort of wrap all this archival material up and do some creative storytelling with the story of the campus and focus on their veterans. And then we can use all of this content to help build some curriculum for high school and junior high to put out there with the public to really help wrap all of this together. And a lot of the records, the public records from the Chilocco, were federal because it was a federal boarding school, and so they're at the National Archives and in various degrees of available online, and so help facilitating discovery of material that's out there and publicly available, as well as the material that we've been working with. There's lots of content in the Oklahoma Historical Society, so it's another one of those things with oral history. We look at this, we don't just look and see what's in our own backyards. We look and see what the broader picture of a story is, and we help try and wrap it together as much as we can, because it benefits the researcher and it benefits us as we're doing the work, and it also tells a greater story of which the component that we're trying to do can fit inside. And so that's probably the biggest. We hope to wrap up. Hopefully by September we'll have a nice neat bow on at least our part of it. We'll see. It's been a really great project. And along with that, for example, we currently have in the OSU South lobby of the Edmond Library is the Patriot Nations exhibit, which is a Smithsonian exhibit that is talking about the history of Native American military service. And we brought that in. Mainly, we requested to host that because of the work we were doing with Chilocco and the story that we were trying to tell through our own research with them. And we also have a series of programming that we've been doing around that exhibit. For example, March 16th, we have a Veterans History workshop, which is the Veterans History Project is a Library of Congress program. Where people do interviews with veterans in their lives or their communities, and they deposit those interviews in the Library of Congress with the Veterans History Project. And the Veterans History Project, in turn, has all these satellite trainers that do workshops on request around the country, and I'm one of those satellite trainers. And so we'll host Veterans History Project training so people can participate in that. And we're trying to put we're building it around a Native American focus, so we can sort of the training will be how to participate in the project in general, but it will be sort of like how do you work with Native communities and in doing that, and what are some special considerations when working with Native veterans. So that's one of those ways that one project can sort of, take over for a while in a really wonderful way. But we also have other running projects all the time. We have, for example, the Native Arts has been ongoing. We just started a new project with a group, the Oklahoma Conservation Historical Society, which is a newly formed group of primarily retired conservationists in Oklahoma, and that's soil conservation, nature conservation, land reclamation, water conservation. I mean, all these people who've worked in this for decades and decades around the state, and Oklahoma has been a leader in lots of different conservation areas. And so we've been working with them to do a small series of oral history interviews around that contribution in the state as well. We just started that last weekend. There's just always just a few different balls rolling. We just started a project this last year too that is fairly new about called Deep Roots Oklahoma Authors, an oral history project. And so it's interviewing authors in Oklahoma. And the first year that we're doing it, we're primarily focusing on women and minority authors, and trying to get a really broad spectrum of what people are writing and what their background is and what their topics are and things like that, to really understand how Oklahoma impacts sort of some of the literary work out there that people are producing. I'll stop because I could just keep
you
going.
have a lot going on.
Yeah,
there's a lot coming.
All really exciting.
But then, for example, like the soil conservation, we have some collections like the H.H. Fennell collection, who was involved with conservation efforts after and during the Dust Bowl. And so we have his collection of material. And so hopefully we have things that blend and cover.
Oh, and even, the lantern slides you showed too.
Lantern
from
slides.
that. I mean,
Right.
There's really incredible archival material that's already out there that we also use in the course of our research, but that we can always point back to. Yeah, totally.
And oral histories and the archive both usually have articles in State Magazine, which is a more traditional way, but also reaches an audience. Hopefully we let them know collections and projects we're working on. So got to cover a lot of bases.
Yeah. Well, thank you all both for sharing all your information and sharing all what's going on in your departments. And we hope that the people at home learn something and that they're interested in coming to find out more of what's going on in the archives and with the OHRP. So thank you all again for sharing all of that. Thank you all at home for viewing and for sending in your questions. And we hope that you enjoyed. Don't forget to go and look at some of these, the topics mentioned online through the OkStateLibrary page under research and digital collections. And we hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching Archives Live.